Welcome. I am a lay Shin Buddhist who nevertheless maintains an interest in the broader realm of Pure Land and Mahayana Buddhist teachings. My YouTube channel is called Akala Akala, that is Acala Acala. In these podcasts, I make a non-scholarly, humble, and sometimes bumbling attempt to explore a particular topic or question related to the wonderful Buddha Dharma. I hope you find them to be of interest. With that said, let us begin. In this podcast, I would like to highlight a particular section, small section, from two different wonderful Mahayana or Great Vehicle scriptures, one being the Lanka Vitara Sutra and the other being the Awakening of Faith. As far as the Lanka Vitara, those of you who watch my YouTube channel will know that I actually am almost on the verge of completing an unabridged recitation of the whole D.T. Suzuki translation. And after Chapter 9, which is the last chapter, there's a section called the Sagathakam. I'm not sure how you pronounce it, but basically what Suzuki says in a footnote is that this section consists entirely of verses, and he indicates that it probably was added later into the text. He says the subjects treated are many and varied, including those that have never appeared in the text. The verses, he says, are in a most confused condition, and it is frequently quite difficult to disentangle them and give them a semblance of order. He says the reader may use his own judgment in the matter. Well, there's one particular verse that I want to highlight, but before I do that, let me just give you the sort of introductory verse, where the author of the verses says, "Listen to the wonderful Mahayana doctrine declared in this Lankavatara Sutra, composed into verse gems and destroying a net of the philosophical views." So this gets to the point that, as Suzuki indicates in his studies on the Lankavatara, and as I try to communicate to students that I talk to in various world religion classes, the point being that while the Lankavatara contains many what seem to be philosophical views and metaphysical theories, in reality, the whole point is not at all philosophical. The whole point is spiritual, to help the individual reading the sutra and practicing in accordance with its teachings to get in touch with what is referred to in the sutra as the inner realization of noble wisdom. Well, we're going to set that aside because, of course, that's part of the path of sages, or the holy path, or the difficult path, as Nagarjuna calls it. But again, let's now go to the verse in question. The verse in question is number 141, but before we get to it, let's have a quick look at number 140, where the author says, "The world is everywhere filled with Buddhas of maturity, Buddhas of transformation, beings, bodhisattvas, and Buddha lands." Well, this is partially a reference, although I don't think it's fully fleshed out in this sutra, of the so-called three-body doctrine, the Trikaya doctrine of Buddhahood, where you've got the Dharmakaya, which is the law body or the truth body, and then the Nirmanakaya, which is the form body in human form, such as Sakyamuni Buddha, and in between these two, in a sense, is the Sambhogakaya, or the bliss body, which I think of as the spiritual level of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas that populate the universe, and each of whom has their respective Buddha land. And of course, our main concern and focus is on Amida Buddha, who to my mind is one of these Sambhogakaya Buddhas, who has his Buddha land as being known to us as the pure land of bliss in the Western paradise. So, again, the world or universe is everywhere filled with these Buddhas and Buddha lands. And then in verse number 141, the author says, "The issuing Buddhas, Dharma Buddhas, transformation Buddhas, and those that appear transformed, they all come forth from Amitabha's land of bliss." So, in that sense, from a Pure Land Buddhism perspective, we think of, or at least I do, all these various Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, not just those at the spiritual level, but also those at the Nirmanakaya or form body level, the transformation Buddhas that come into the world to help teach us, to liberate us from our suffering. All these various Buddhas, to my mind, are emanations from Amitabha Buddha, or the Buddha of infinite light, also known as Amitayus Buddha, the Buddha of infinite life, or as we say in our Nembutsu, Amida Buddha. Namo Amida Butsu. I think of them as emanations, and of course they all emanate from the Dharmakaya, but we can't really pin down or describe the Dharmakaya or the truth body or the law body or reality as it is. We can't describe that in any terms whatsoever. No concepts, no words. So we kind of take it at the next level, which would be Amida, who in some sense most fundamentally consists of wisdom and compassion. And of course, his compassion is characterized by that most wonderful emanation, namely Kuan Yin Bodhisattva, or Avalokiteshvara, the regarder of the cries of the world, who we learn about in chapter 25 of the Lotus Sutra, and who is adored and worshipped throughout all countries and lands where Buddhism thrives. So now let's turn to the awakening of faith, which was attributed to Asvaghosha, and this particular version was translated by Yoshito Hakeda and was published by Columbia University Press. At the beginning of the preface, there's an indication that the awakening of faith is one of the basic texts of Mahayana Buddhism used by most of its major schools. And they indicate that the popularity of the text in East Asian Buddhism is well attested by numerous works written on it throughout the ages in China, Korea, and Japan. What I have found with the awakening of faith in terms of my own sort of take on it, my own perspective, is that it's much different than many of the Mahayana Sutras in the sense it's not at all fantastical in terms of, describing these sort of very elaborated scenes and by giving, numerous parables, sort of less direct forms of communicating the Buddha Dharma. Rather than that, in the introduction, they say, the work is a comprehensive summary of the essentials of Mahayana Buddhism, the product of a mind extraordinarily apt at synthesis. It begins with an examination of the nature of the absolute, or enlightenment, and of the phenomenal world, or non-enlightenment, and discusses the relationships that exist between them. From there it passes on to the question of how may man transcend his finite state and participate in the life of the infinite while still remaining in the midst of the phenomenal order. It concludes with a discussion of particular practices and techniques that will aid the believer in the awakening and growth of his faith. So what I want to do then, in terms of the little snippet I want to highlight, is to go to the end regarding one of the practices and techniques that the awakening of faith recommends. And I do want to acknowledge that there is some indication where we see a reference to Amida and the Pure Land, that this may have been an add-on, just as in some ways that sort of verse from the Lanka Vitara may have been an add-on. But the fact that these faith-oriented Pure Land elements have been added on is not arbitrary. It's related, in my opinion, to the fact that there were tens of millions of Buddhists who followed the Pure Land path, that was the easy path that really was and still is available to the largest number of people in our Saha world. In any case, this section of the Awakening of Faith, and by the way, I hope you can excuse the sort of gender bias in this translation where it's consistently referring to he or man or men or whatever, that, we can sort of transpose that in our own mind to reflect a broader sort of gender-free way of expressing it if we wish. So in the practice section, after the focus on the practice of cessation and the practice of clear observation, which the scripture describes as complementary and inseparable, there is a paragraph that refers to Pure Land Buddhism, and it goes thus. Suppose there is a man who learns this teaching for the first time and wishes to seek the correct faith, but lacks courage and strength. Because he lives in this world of suffering, he fears that he will not always be able to meet the Buddhas and honor them personally, and that, faith being difficult to perfect, he will be inclined to fall back. he should know that the Tathagatas have an excellent expedient means by which they can protect his faith. That is, through the strength of wholehearted meditation on the Buddha, he will, in fulfillment of his wishes, be able to be born in the Buddha land beyond, to see the Buddha always, and to be forever separated from the evil states of existence. It is, as the sutra says, quote, if a man meditates wholly on Amitabha Buddha in the world of the Western Paradise, and wishes to be born in that world, directing all the goodness he has cultivated toward that goal, then he will be born there. Close quote. Because he will see the Buddha at all times, he will never fall back. If he meditates on the Dharmakaya, the suchness of the Buddha, and with diligence keeps practicing the meditation, he will be able to be born there in the end, because he abides in the correct samadhi. So, there we have it from the Awakening of Faith. And of course, that's not Shinran's necessarily interpretation of Pure Land Buddhism, but it is a very broad one that again has had applicability for millions and millions and millions of human beings over the course of history as they have longed for and sought relief from their suffering. Namo Amida Butsu. With that, I will sign off by reciting the Nembutsu in gratitude for being embraced and accepted just as I am by Amida Buddha, never, never to be abandoned. Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu.